Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision 33. And my guest today is Lara Miller from Lara Miller Public Relations. Lara, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Carl. It's weird for me to be on this side of it, but thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Just full disclosure, Lara has helped me a lot finding guests for the podcast over the last couple of years. But she did something that I thought was worthy of an interview herself. And that was to basically move her office to a camper van and go on the road in the middle of the pandemic. And so I wanted Lara to come and tell us all about that experience. And so, Lara, my first question is, tell us a little bit about your company, but then tell me, why did you come up with this idea?
Sure. So a little bit about me. I've been a PR consultant for over 16 years now. Most of the time it's been remote. Luckily and thankfully, I'm in that position to be able to work remotely. Before the pandemic, I tell people, I would have clients for years and not know what they look like because we didn't do video calls. And, I don't really travel much to on-site. But yeah, that's I started in celebrity PR and got burnt out on that and switched over to tech in 2010. So that's kind of my story. Another part of my life is being continually restless. So I have Wanderlust. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy going places. I usually travel, 2 to 3 months out of each year. And obviously with the pandemic, all of that stopped. And I had moved, I also move a lot. So I moved to Burlington, Vermont at the very start of the pandemic in 2020. And my Wanderlust really kicked in there in the winter. It was a miserable winter. So I decided to buy a Winnebago Travato, a 2020 Winnebago Travato, and hit the road with my cat. And that was last January that Kitty Rogers is my cat that we hit the road.
Pretty amazing. So the fact that you've been remote much of your career really lent itself. You could adapt very easily, to doing this out of the van. But what were the challenges of, okay, all of a sudden now I'm not in my apartment. I've got to have internet access, obviously, and things like that. What were some of the ways that you decided where you were going to go?
So I'm a person that runs really well on a schedule. And I knew that if I could get myself on a set schedule every day, no matter where I was, then I would be okay. So as far as preparation, I bought 3 hotspots. So I had Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. So I figured I would be covered anywhere in the US. I went with that. I bought a national gym membership. Getting to the gym every day is really important to me. So I said, okay, it's part of my routine every day, plan to go to the gym, or 5 days a week, plan to go to the gym, and try to keep the same routines that I had at home, but do it in the van. So I found that as long as I was able to stick to that routine, I did really well. So get up at my normal time, 7 o'clock, drink a cup of coffee, go to the gym, obviously drive the van to the gym, answer some emails right before that, while I was drinking coffee in the morning, and then get my workout in, and then get back to work afterwards. For me, I think people's challenges are different across the spectrum for people to do this, but for me, it is very important to have a routine and to stick with it. There were a lot of other variables that came into it, making sure that I had service in places, finding a gym, figuring out where I was going to sleep for that week or, for the night. So those were all things that factor into it, but it's just, to me, that was the fun part. Planning was the fun part. It was exhausting, but it was also the fun part.
Where all did you go over the last year?
So we went 35,000 miles in a year.
Wow.
That's how many miles I put on the van. We started in Burlington, Vermont in January when it was 16 below, and hightailed it down to South Carolina. That was our first our first big spot to stay, so that I could use my plumbing. We had to de-winterize and do all of that. After that, it was further south, through and then over through west, so over through Texas, up the coast. Spent a lot of time in Montana. That's where I grew up. And didn't make it to the Midwest. That was the only place that I didn't make it. But it was amazing because I could be in a new place. I could be in a new state, and I could be like, all right, this weekend I'm traveling here and I'm going to go here, and I've never checked that out. So, but 35,000 miles. My favorite in the first part of the trip was Marfa, Texas, and West Texas. Terrible internet coverage there. I had to really search, but it was worth it. and there was no gym, so that threw me for a loop. But that was my first stop. That was my absolute favorite.
And then, if I remember right, you spent part of the winter in Baja.
I did. So what happened with that? I have friends that they own a marketing company. They're called Dark Marketing, and they decided to pull the kids out of school, buy a trailer, and hit the road as well. So I saw them in July, and we met up on the road. And then they said, "Hey, we're going to Baja in October. Do you want to come?" And of course, I said yes immediately. So I try to never say no to things like that. So yeah, we planned it. We took us about 5 days to drive down to southern Baja, just north of Cabo. And we stayed in an RV resort there. And it was amazing for the time that I was there.
That's great. How did your clients respond to this, or did they even know for the most part?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky in that I have a really strong base of a few clients that I've had for years. And from the CEO on down, they loved it. They, there were people in the main company that I've worked for, the bulk of my hours. There were people in the company that didn't know that I had done it, and I would get on a call with them, and they could see either, the ocean behind me, or the woods behind me, or even just my controller in the RV, and they'd say, "Where are you? What are you doing?" And I would tell them. So 9 out of 10 clients that I had were excited and wanted to know details. I did have a PR company that I was contracted with that said, "Okay, it's great you're doing this, but do not tell our clients that you're doing this. They wouldn't understand." So, I had to be careful there and make sure that my background was blurred when I was on calls. But the majority of my clients loved it. And I even had a client, I mainly do enterprise tech PR, but I had a product client that sent me a bunch of their products to put in the van and said, "Hey, try this out for us and let us know what you think." So
that's great.
It's great. Yeah.
So what did you learn?
Oh my gosh. So I think my biggest lesson, and it's something that I continually have to, teach myself better ways to be patient. I'm a fast mover. I do things quickly. I'm, gung ho. Let's get it done, get it over with. Do these things. And when you're in a van, you cannot have that mentality. You have to be patient. I mean, whether it's, your toilet breaking and you have to get it fixed. Well, they can't get you in for a week, so you have to be patient. You have to stick around and be patient to get it fixed. Even with just my Wi-Fi signal, it was like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I have to wait 2 hours before I have signal, and then I can get this email. Your life is completely thrown up in the air. I look at it as, you throw your life up in the air, and it breaks, and jagged pieces are everywhere, and you have to figure out how to put it back together when things go wrong. I'll give you an example. I spent a lot of time in Yellowstone in May, which was an amazing experience. Every morning I would get up really early, and I would go into the park and watch wolves, the wolf pups, leave their den with their mom and their the teenagers in the wolf pack. And then I would drive back to the campground and I would work. I had gone to a restaurant on a Saturday night in town. It was Gardner, Montana. And I left my debit card there. And that's the main one that I had everything on, most of my money in. and could not find it anywhere. I did not know that I had left it there. So I had to come up with a plan like, okay, they're not open till Tuesday. So do I drive to this town 2.5 hours away where my bank is to get a card and then drive back here? Or do I wait until Tuesday? And luckily they had it. But it's things like that that you don't ever think that, okay, this is going to be a problem. And it was. So like I said, learning patience, but also always having a backup plan. So important.
Good. I was just asking, how did people that you met on the road respond to as they learned what you were doing?
Pretty well. Because it was pandemic and I still wanted to be careful. I really didn't meet that many people. I would, meet people in a bar or a restaurant if I stopped in for a beer, and then I would have conversation. I had amazing conversations with some people in some of the little towns that I stopped in. I talked to people at the gym, but I really didn't have a lot of interaction with people outside of that. And then people in the, in RV parks or campgrounds, most of them are doing the same thing. So it's not a big deal. You're traveling, well, so are we. I did make some friends in New Mexico at a brewery where we were staying the night. They were parked there, and we parked there overnight. And I'm still friends with them to this day. But it was mostly when I put myself in those situations to meet people that I would meet them. So, and I'm pretty much, despite being a publicist, I'm an introvert. So I'm very happy being alone with my cat. So I think you also have to have a little bit of that personality in order to be successful at it.
Sounds like. So if somebody said to you tomorrow, I think I'm going to do that for a year, what advice would you give them?
Oh my gosh. So I think be very careful about the vehicle that you buy and use. One thing I learned is that RVs in general are not meant to be lived in full time. So I think everything broke in mine. Everything, I was constantly things or just ripping it out completely because I couldn't fix it. Have really good backups in place. Me being a female alone, I'm not ever worried about places that I'm going or places that I'm staying. But I do have a friend that I would drop my location to if I was in, okay, not in the middle of nowhere and nobody's around, and here's my location. Mm-hmm. There's lots of apps that you can get that will tell you about like different Wi-Fi reception in places if you're staying. But also, I think for me, a lesson that I learned on the road is to slow down and to really enjoy where you are. I was very much like, oh, I need to go to this next place. I need to keep moving. And I actually had friends say, wow, you're not staying in any places for more than a day or two. And that's why we went 35,000 miles, I think. But it's hard for me to express the joy of waking up, pulling over on Highway 1 in Oregon on a pullout and spending the night watching the, overlooking the ocean and then watching the sun come up in the morning, or in Yellowstone, in Mammoth Campground in Yellowstone, being woken up by an elk bugling right outside your door, and being able to work at the same time. Like those are just. I do have an antidote to share on why it was so important to have Wi-Fi service. I had gotten a client's product on the Today Show, but they hadn't given me the date that it was going to run. And I normally would travel on Friday, Saturday, and Sundays when I would do the bulk of my driving. I was in Mammoth Valley in Utah on that Friday and didn't have any service. But the biggest cell phone kit I found in the US is in Mammoth, Utah. It's just no service anywhere. You have to drive, 3 or 4 hours to get service. So I was out messing around, taking all these pictures and taking selfies in front of the monuments. I went to Gooseneck State Park and, was hanging out there. And then I, had to get where I was going. So I took off, and then my phone just started going nuts as soon as I had service. And the Today Show piece had run that morning, and I didn't know that it had. And it was good. I mean, obviously it was a good thing. But also at the same time, another one of my clients was announcing that they were getting acquired, and they had just found out that day. So it was a mess. In retrospect, I would have done that trip on a Sunday, so I didn't have to, worry about working. But it was all good news. So it was okay. It could have been a disaster, but it was all good news. So
sometimes things just work out.
That's how it happens sometimes. Yep,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. So now, and if I remember correctly, you have settled for a while in Portland, right?
I have, yes. I was in Portland before. I may have lived here a couple of years ago. I also, I had a really tragic event happen this past summer, and I was alone through all of it. And it was, one of the hardest things I've ever gone through by myself. And I really at that time decided, okay, it's good to have a home base. When I started, I had sold everything I owned and said, okay, this is what I'm doing. And I had this mobile, mailbox. And now I'm going to try to have a little balance in my life and have a home base. And then also be able to leave for a month or two and travel, but, kind of have the best of both worlds.
Sounds like a good hybrid. Yeah.
Yes. And it was good. I'm an extreme person. So I had to go to the extreme and sell everything and buy the van for a year. And then, okay, I'll get this place here in Portland, and I'll keep the van, and I'll, kind of moderate it a little bit.
Well, I think it's great that you followed your dreams. And I think it's encouraging to other people to realize maybe I could do something like that too.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us today. And I know that it'll be exciting for other people.
Yeah, it's, I think if you just keep this work ethic, be patient, and have good clients or a good boss, I think it's possible.
Well, in any case, for everyone else and for Lara, we will see you next time. And until then, stay connected.